In 1989, I lived in Daytona Beach, Florida. My dad was a deacon at church, and Mom sang in the choir, and I was their bouncing little baby girl. I guess you could say that we were a good Christian family, always went out of our way to help others. Because of that, my father may very well have lost his life had I not been with him. One day, while traveling from my grandparents' house in Ormond Beach over the Granada Bridge, we were stopped as the bridge was being lowered. My father looks over and sees a woman hitchhiking, so he offers her a ride. At first, she's pretty gung-ho about it, but then she sees me in the back seat and her whole demeanor changes. She refuses, but my dad insisted, so she gets in. We take her over to a bar in downtown, and she thanks my father. He recalls her being a bit strange, really twitchy and nervous. She had nothing but nice things to say about me though, going on about what a pretty baby I was. She told him as she got out of the car that he was lucky to have me with him, and that he should thank God for me. Fast forward some time, and my dad and Mom are watching the news. Suddenly, Dad starts wigging out. "I picked her up and took her to a bar," he screams at the TV. There on the news was a sketch drawing of the same woman he picked up on the bridge. The anchorman said that her name was Eileen Warnos, and she was wanted for murder. To this day, my father swears that had I not been in the car, he may very well have been killed. Before the story, just a little background information. I'm a 15-year-old guy living in northern Florida with my mom and my dog. We live in a 2-story apartment located in a small apartment complex that just happens to be right next to an old cemetery. Just to be clear, I get out of school at 3 o'clock, and my mom doesn't get off work until 5, so it's typical of her to take a late lunch and pick me up, then go back to work for another hour and a half and get home around 5:30. Anyways, on with the story. So it was around 3 months after we moved into our condo when this occurred. It was a typical Friday for me, go to school, get home at 3:15, and be home alone until my mom got there. On this particular day, my mom decided to stay late and wouldn't get home until 8 o'clock. I, like most other teenagers, didn't mind being home alone for extended periods of time, simply because I got to play video games without any interruption. It's around 6:15. My dog was whining, so I decided to take him for a walk. As I walked downstairs, I heard what sounded like someone breathing outside my front door. Not just light breathing. I mean, it sounded like someone had finished running a marathon or something. I turned to investigate, and to my horror, I saw a tall, shirtless man standing with his face pressed directly against the glass. This man had to be at least 6'7" in his mid-50s and had a lumberjack-style beard with very large glasses. My kitchen is right next to my front door, so I grabbed the biggest knife I could and told him to fuck off. He seemed emotionless and simply walked away. I wish the story ended there, but of course, it didn't. It was now around 7:30, so it was getting dark, and there was no signs of the creepy man, so I decided it was safe to proceed outside. So me and my dog walked our usual path, which led us directly past the cemetery. This time, it was different. I had this eerie feeling that I wasn't alone. I could feel someone watching me. My dog's ears perked up and eventually stopped walking altogether. he began to stare towards the cemetery and started barking uncontrollably. I started looking to see what he was barking at, and to my absolute shock, I saw the same bearded guy from before. He looked different though, almost like he was leaning on something, but I couldn't quite see what it was. As I leaned in to take a closer look, I realized that it was a shovel, and he had a red bag on the ground next to him with what looked like a human foot sticking out of the bottom of it. Was this creep digging a fucking grave? Was this creep digging a fucking grave? I asked myself. What happened next still sends chills down my spine. He gave me the creepiest smile I've ever seen. Then he simply picked up his shovel and once again began digging as if he never saw me. Safe to say, me and my dog got the hell out of there. When I got back home, my mom was already there, and I told her what happened. She called the cops, and I guess they went to the cemetery to investigate, but found nothing. We moved out of that place a few months later. 6 months have now passed, and I still haven't heard anything from the police. I just hope he's either dead or in jail somewhere. So sick fuck in the cemetery, let's never meet again. This is a story my uncle told me before he died. Unfortunately, I'm unable to provide proof of this occurrence, but I don't think he would lie about something like this. I'm going to write this story from his perspective as it was told to me. It was the mid-1980s in Arkansas. My girlfriend at the time dragged me to a wedding. She was close friends with the bride. The wedding took place on a ranch. I have to say, it was a pretty nice setup, surrounded on all sides by a thick forest that stretched on for miles. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. It took us 3 hours just to reach the place from where I lived, but the journey was worth it, even though I didn't know a whole lot of people there. I still had a great time. I even danced. I never dance. There was an open bar, so you can imagine that things got pretty wild as the night progressed. After about an hour of me reenacting Saturday Night Fever on the dance floor, I had to sit down because my feet were starting to hurt. Before I go on, let me explain the layout of this ranch. The ranch and the outdoor dance floor was located in a clearing that was surrounded on all sides by trees. There was a tree line about 35 to 40 yards away from where I was, and there was a lot of bright lights around the dance floor. But beyond that, it was completely dark. As I was sitting there rubbing my sore feet, I could see something taking place in the distance just outside the tree line. I couldn't see too clearly because of the lighting, but what I saw kind of amused me. I saw a dark figure dragging someone into the tree line. Again, it was hard to see, but I thought the person that was being dragged was wearing one of the bright yellow bridesmaid dresses. I chuckled when I saw that. I remembered thinking, looks like someone drank too much. I feel the need to point out that I too was a little intoxicated, otherwise I may have said something about someone being dragged away from the party into a dark forest. Maybe I thought the two were gonna get freaky in the woods or something. A few hours later, we left the wedding celebrations, but what I found out 2 days later made my stomach drop. Apparently, one of the bridesmaids went missing after the wedding. I told the police what I remembered seeing that night. The very next day, they found the body of the missing bridesmaid in the woods. She had been dismembered, and some of her limbs were found scattered throughout the forest. From what I hear, they didn't even recover all of her body parts. The person responsible was never found. I felt guilty for many years after this because I can't help but to think I could have saved her life if I said something. She wasn't even 20 years old yet. She had her whole life ahead of her, but she ended up in pieces. And poverty, but then again, nearly everyone else was too. Around 13 or 14, my mother, who had a stroke while having an aneurysm, was warned that one blow to the head could be fatal. She used to take me everywhere. We lived off a disability from my father, so she didn't work. Instead, she would take me cigarette butt hunting at night in the downtown business district, which was ripe with half-smoked cigarettes. It's important to note that my mother was a friend without nicotine, and I would do everything to get her some. During the day, we did the soup kitchen tour where we met some nice people who were homeless or poor. It was at a soup kitchen where we met Ray. "Don't worry, he's gay. He's not gonna try nothing," my mother's friend said during our introduction. He was a tall man, probably 6'2" or 6'3", very thin, with skin that hung from his bones as if he had once been a rather large man. He wore small, thicker lens glasses, but spoke with a southern accent and a gentleness. Something about him was alluring, and he seemed rather paternal to me. Ray and my mother Linda hit it off and became friends. We met up at the soup kitchens, and soon the nightly adventures to the ashtrays in the business district stopped, as he would often give my mother some money and smokes. He also fed me chips and fast food, a much appreciated break from the canned corn I would otherwise be eating. Fast forward a little, a couple of months pass, and we begin to trust him. He seemed genuinely excited to see us and was very kind, so much so that my mother did not hesitate to go over his house and take me along. At his house, my mother would take up residence on a love seat, and Ray would sit next to me. He often put his arm around me and pressed me up to him. I loved this because I was young and had a rotten tough time in school and was without friends. My family was broken, so I didn't see my father. The genuine love he had for me makes me cringe now that I'm older and more aware. While walking down the hallway from his apartment, his hand brushed my backside. I matured early and was about as tall as my mom and half a foot smaller than him. The hallway was tight and I thought about it for a second, but dismissed the caress as innocent. I knew I swung my hands like an ape whenever I moved, so I could hardly fault him. Other people we knew saw us with Ray more and more. They became concerned. Grace and Matt had known Ray. They pulled my mother aside and told her that he was insane. They told her that they had gone to buy a trailer, but Ray wanted it as well. They argued for a bit, but the couple didn't budge. That trailer burnt down a couple of days later. Another friend had told my mother that Ray's son was a dentist and was doing well for himself, but had been molested as a kid by Ray. Ray never told us he had a son, not even a hint of it. When my mom told me this, I broke down and cried, but she wanted to keep it hushed. I should point out that my mother was an immoral woman. She had been old enough to know what she was like before she had health issues. She suffered, but my brother said that she was always bad, but afterwards became a monster. She would still see Ray and bring me around him. I broke down in class one day. I looked at my teacher, who really loved me and had been there for me during rough times. She asked if I was okay because she saw my eyes water, but I burst out uncontrollably and sobbed. I could not stop thinking about him touching me and what I had heard. I know it sounds melodramatic, but the uncertainty and the betrayal of my trust wounded me greatly. I don't know if I can give out the school name or not. We'll call it LMM, as that is the school's initials. The teacher told the principal and guidance counselor. The guidance counselor took me into a room and sat me down. He asked me a bunch of questions about Ray that I answered. He kept me alone with him in a room and would not tell me why. I found out later they called my brother's school and my mother at the same time and interviewed them over the phone. My brother had moved into his girlfriend's house, so he hadn't really dealt too much with Ray, but said that he knew him, and my mother ended up telling them everything. The police were called and they drove me to my house as school had ended and they did not want me walking home. They got to my house and told my mother that they would talk to Ray about me. They came back an hour later and told me that he could not speak to me anymore. They couldn't stop him from coming near us, but he was absolutely forbidden to talk to me. It turns out they found him outside the school with money and a new bike. The money was for me because he knew I valued cash to get my mom smokes, and the bike was for my brother. Ray planned to kidnap me that day. I have no doubt about it. A few years more until I turned 16 and moved out of my house, I would run into Ray while walking with Mom. He would always stare at me, but talk to her. My mom would talk back with him, and she never addressed what happened. I moved to Maine at 16 though, away from them both. So, to the mother who I suspect was willing to give me up for her addiction, and to the stranger who slithered into my life like a snake, let's not meet again. Okay, so this event only occurred really recently, and I still can't believe it happened. I live in Sydney, Australia, and I'm very used to the occasional insane or creepy person on the street or bus, etc. I know how to deal with them and act around them most of the time. A few weeks ago, I decided to go shopping at a big shopping center known as Westfields in Australia. I'm not sure where they're called elsewhere. They are always busy, and it's hard to find parking, but I managed to get a great spot in the parking lot on the level where you can enter the center. I shopped and everything was good. I had some lunch, bought some groceries, and a new dress. I exited the shopping center and started walking towards my car. There wasn't anybody in the parking lot except for a few cars trying to find a spot. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I noticed a lady walking in the other lane next to mine. She had tangled, matted and thinning hair. She wasn't dressed in the nicest or newest clothes. She was talking to herself, but I didn't think much of it because people do that when they're trying to remember something or going over something in their head. Then she starts screaming. Nothing in particular, just gibberish. I look over to see what she's doing or if she's injured, but nope, she's fine, just staring directly at me and screaming. She locks eyes with mine as soon as I turn to see what she was yelling about. A few seconds pass and nothing happens. She keeps screaming while keeping direct eye contact with me. Then her mouth spreads into an insanely terrifying grin. She stops screaming and starts bolting towards me. I was frozen for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only 3 seconds. I hightailed it to my car, chucked my shopping bag in the seat next to mine, cracked all my eggs, and slammed the door shut just in time. This lady starts banging on my car, screaming while trying to open the doors. I quickly back out of my spot, not caring if I knocked this batshit crazy lunatic to the ground. I didn't. She was fine, physically. But at this point, she climbs onto my fucking trunk and tries to break my back window. I start to move the car, and she jumps off, but chases after me for a few levels, and then I lost her. My heart was beating so fast, I thought I was going into cardiac arrest. I called the police and told them where I saw her and what she did. They didn't find her at the shopping center, and I haven't heard anything else about this. but my boyfriend offered to get me a new carton of eggs. This happened a little over a decade ago when I was an undergrad. I worked as a pharmacy technician my sophomore through senior years. At a pharmacy, of course, you have regulars. One regular was Joe, a mid-30s man with long straggly hair and an affinity for bizarre outfits. He was very sweet, but also very ill, mentally and physically. He was on a cocktail of antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, etc. Also, he was on medicine for AIDS. Normally, Joe would come in with his mother, who took care of him. However, his mother was older and had her own health problems. Towards the end of my junior year, Joe started coming in by himself, so he would walk from his home or take a taxi. Joe told me frequently that I looked like a young Michelle Pfeiffer, that I should be in LA, yada yada. Aside from the curly blonde hair, I never really saw the resemblance, but okay. I was polite, told him thanks, and asked him how his mother was. Made general small talk while I rang up his scripts. He never gave me the beware vibe. My senior year, Joe's mother came in without him and told us that Joe wasn't doing well. He was refusing to take his antipsychotics, and she was getting too old to defend herself if Joe went into a rage. She was having him placed in a home for patients like Joe. I didn't know until that day that Joe was technically under guardianship. The courts and his doctors deemed him too ill to make important financial and medical decisions. Joe's mother gave us the medical release so that Joe's new home could send their staff to pick up his medicine. We didn't see Joe for about 4 months. It was the end of my senior year, a Friday night. Just me and the pharmacist were working because Friday nights are slow. I was reading a magazine when I heard,
"Hey, Michelle."
I'm not Michelle, so I didn't look up. Then angry,
"Michelle!"
and a slap on the counter in front of me made me look up. It was Joe. He was bleeding profusely and left a bloody handprint on the counter. I was shocked, and all I could do was slowly back away to put distance between myself and the very bloody Joe. The pharmacist came rushing over to ask Joe what he was doing here. His home had picked up his meds on Tuesday.
"I wanted to see Michelle. I miss her."
Then he started opening the waist-high door to get behind the pharmacy counter. The pharmacist called the store manager and told the manager to call 911 while she called Joe's mother.
"Michelle, come here. Give me a hug."
No, I don't think that would be appropriate, Joe.
"Give me a hug."
Then he just started screaming this over and over and attempting to climb over the counter. The pharmacist told me to go into the back storage room and lock the door. This just pissed Joe off. He started picking up items, which covered them in blood, and threw them at us. It was a chaotic mess. A patron was about to attempt to subdue Joe, but both the pharmacist and I both shouted not to touch him due to him being covered in blood and positive for HIV. We told the small crowd that had formed to leave for their safety as Joe was flinging items and getting blood everywhere. Eventually, the police and EMTs arrived. The store manager must have explained the blood and HIV issue because they had on protective gear, long gloves, face masks, etc., and were able to forcibly sedate Joe. The store had to be shut down, and a special cleaning crew had to come in and clean the entire store. Joe's mother came to apologize after the store reopened. She explained that Joe had developed an obsession for me and grew angrier and angrier each month when he was not allowed to tag along to pick up his meds. He attacked one of their home residents the night of the incident, so the home grounded him and sent him to his room. Joe broke his window and crawled out through the broken glass and walked to the pharmacy. The home did not know he had broken out until his mother called frantically. His mother was considering suing the home for negligence, and she had moved Joe to a more secure mental health facility. I used to work at a security company with a bunch of friends. We all got along well, and most of us even hung out after work. The ones I didn't hang out with kept to themselves. They were two brothers that worked nights with me, and they were in their own group. They were new to the company and would have many conversations about their guns. Bill was the older brother, and Luke was the younger. After hearing Luke and Bill talk about target shooting so much, I developed an interest. I don't own a single firearm, but my roommate owns several. I mentioned at work one night that I was going shooting in the morning with my roommate, and I needed a good place to go to. Well, the two brothers pointed out a spot on Google Earth for me and said it was great, and they have gone shooting up there once before. It was about 45 minutes away and was higher up in the mountains. I knew the spot precisely due to a single image posted to the coordinates on Google Earth, with used shotgun shells covering the ground. I decided that it was as good a spot as any, and told my roommate Dawn where to drive us. We arrived the next morning at 10 a.m. and parked at the top of the hill. We saw our spot about 150 yards away in a clearing down in the valley and began hiking down. A quick side note, I wore this bright neon yellow hooded sweatshirt at work, and during the winter, I'm also a pretty large fella. Being big and brightly colored makes you very visible from far away. I've seen hunters using bright colors to avoid accidentally getting shot by other hunters. I decided to wear my trademark bright hoodie on our little hike. We made it a quarter way down the hill, and I see a group of fellow target shooters at our desired spot. These were the only other people we had seen in 30 minutes. Our spot is taken. Lame, I said. The second I said lame, that's when shit hit the fan. We were on the side of the mountain walking down towards them, and the rounds started flying. This group was shooting at us. Dawn and I were targets for about 3 guns, and we didn't have immediate cover. I see Dawn running across the mountain, strafing the shooters. I see what he is running for. It was a small plateau about 20 yards next to us. The sounds of bullets flying inches away from my ears is a sound that I will never forget. Movies do not do the sound justice at all, not even close. I still get chills thinking about it now. The vibration and the rotation of the bullets chilled my bones. It's not a sound I would want to hear again. It made everything go slow-mo and very clear. My adrenaline was kicking in. We made it to cover and hit the dirt. We were pinned down, but at least we had cover now. I had to have heard at least 100 rounds pass just over the lip of the plateau. I heard a pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun. I know I did. The trees, boulders, and mountainside were being hammered by round after round. If we had sat up from our cover, we would have been shot in the face. These people were shooting up a hill, towards a road. They had their backs to their paper targets. Thinking back on it, my father said I should have yelled down to them and let them know they were shooting at 2 people and to hold their fire. But the thing is, I think they knew they were shooting at us. How could they not? We weren't that far, and the mountainside was almost bare. I didn't want to let them know they were close to hitting us. I should have shot back. We had the high ground, but I'm not a killer. We just waited and listened for their footsteps and wanted them to stay where they were. If we were killed, no one would have found our bodies out there. 15 minutes went by and the gunfire didn't let up until it just ended. The mountain was quiet again. After about 5 more minutes of silence, we checked down the hill. They were gone. We had our guns ready as we scanned the valley down below. Nothing more. No more guys, no vehicle, just their garbage left behind. We decided it was a great time to get the hell out of the hills. We made it back to our car and back to our house faster than ever. When I went back to work the next shift, I told this story to everyone. I even thanked Bill for the sweet advice. He apologized for the bad locals and said, "That's crazy." Another coworker told me that Bill and Luke went shooting that same morning in the same area. I asked Bill immediately about it. I asked him where he went shooting and what guns he brought with him to shoot. He pointed at the same damned Google Earth image as before. Luke, his friend, and Bill were using a Glock, a .22 rifle, and a 12-gauge shotgun. It was all coming together so quickly. I told him that he was a psycho and almost killed us. He denied shooting at us, even changed his mind about where they went shooting. He said it was actually 2 miles west because his GPS was inaccurate. I knew that he was lying, but what could I do? I had no proof. He worked with me for another 2 years before I moved away and never heard from them again. I remember how emotionless he was when he denied shooting at me. He was like a robot. We never spoke of it after that first time, and I haven't gone shooting since. To give a little bit of background information, this started in the winter of 2012. I was 23 years old at the time and living with my dad. My mom and my brother were living in another house about 10 minutes away from us. One morning, I woke up at around 8 a.m. because I had an early doctor's appointment. I went outside to see a note pinned to the windshield wiper of our car. The note said, "I'm going to kill you, fucking pedophile scum." I kinda just laughed it off. I assumed the note was for my dad, who had a habit of complaining to parents in our neighborhood about their children's shitty behavior. There were these twin boys who liked to try and catch and torture squirrels. He often marched them home by their ears to complain about them to their parents. I thought one of the parents was just being a douchebag, so my dad and I didn't bother with it too much. Later in the day, while talking to my mom on the phone, I mentioned the note to her offhandedly in a very casual way, and I was shocked by her response. She responded by very emphatically warning me several times to make sure all of my windows and doors were locked, and to bring a weapon to bed with me at night. I was a bit taken aback because she had never said anything to me like that before. She had never even given me the good touch, bad touch talk. She reminded me at least 12 times over the course of the conversation to bring a knife or a baseball bat with me to bed, and to lock my bedroom door at night. I thought she was just overreacting, so I waved her off. Then other weird things started happening. We started getting random packages and deliveries sent to our house. Bibles and Qurans, newspapers, porn flyers and pizzas, and moving trucks that we hadn't ordered. The first few times it happened, we thought it was a mistake, but it kept happening. I came to the conclusion that somebody must be pulling a prank on us. We didn't know who it was, so there was nothing that we could do about it but apologize profusely to yet another confused pizza delivery man. In September of that year, I started taking a night school class with my best friend. The course went from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Monday and Wednesday night, and after the class, his mom would come pick us up and drive us home. Sometime in November, his mom dropped me off from school, and I went inside and chilled out on the couch for a couple of hours. I like to wind down a little bit before I go to bed, or I can't sleep. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. Something woke me up abruptly at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I heard the unmistakable sound of a car tire being slashed, and it sounded like our car. What the hell was going on? We didn't have any enemies. In retrospect, this was probably a stupid thing to do, especially considering that I'm a relatively small female. I'm only 5'5" and was 23 at the time. But I grabbed a generic kitchen knife and went outside to check it out. When I got outside, I discovered immediately that I was correct. There was a man in our driveway slashing our tires. Unwisely, I immediately yelled, "Hey, you!" and he turned around to face me. That's when I noticed that he was slashing our tires with an enormous hunting knife, at least 6 inches long. He looked surprised, but then defiant, and began to advance towards me with the knife slightly raised. I just froze. I didn't know what to do. He was coming at me so fast, I couldn't even think. Thankfully, at that exact second, my across-the-street neighbor, who had also heard him slashing our tires, turned his porch light on and yelled out the window, "Hey, I'm calling the police." The man yelled back,
"I don't give a fuck. Call them."
But he quickly retreated back to his car, where I could see a middle-aged woman with long brown hair waiting for him in the passenger seat. Our eyes locked, and I knew instantly we had met before. I couldn't quite put my finger on when or where. I just knew in my gut that I've met this woman before. They sped off into the night, and we called the cops, who said they couldn't do anything for us because they didn't know who had done it. I mean, isn't that kind of your job, though, to find out who did? I called my mom and told her what happened and asked her if she had any idea who had done this to us. She immediately said no, but there was something in her voice. I could just tell that she wasn't being honest. A few weeks later, I decided to go to my mom's house and spend a day or two there, determined to get some answers. As soon as I walked in the front door, I knew something was wrong. The second she saw me, she just started bawling her eyes out. She took me by the hand and sat me on the couch and explained the whole story to me, start to finish. It's necessary for me to give a bit of background information here. My mother is a businesswoman by trade. She was still in sales at the time, but she is also a bit of a hippy-dippy. It's retrograding, so I don't get into any arguments with this weak type of person. On the side of her regular day job, she was selling Arbani makeup, which is a all-natural brand of makeup that is free of parabens, oils, sulfates, and other common cosmetic additives. A couple of months before this all started, she ended up being referred a new client named Andrea by her weed dealer. Yes, my mom smokes weed. This is Canada. Everyone smokes here. Andrea was the dealer's girlfriend, and she was interested in buying Arbani. So my mom invited her over to her apartment to look at some makeup samples. They started chatting about a variety of topics, as women do, and my mom let it slip that her last name was Hayes. As my mom told me, Andrea paused for a few seconds, looked at her and said, "Hayes? Did you used to be married to a man named Darren Hayes?" My mom answered that yes, Darren Hayes, my father, was her ex-husband. And then shockingly, this Andrea woman actually bursted into tears, threw my arms around my mom in a hug, and began to tell her a story about all the disgusting things that my dad had done to her. Apparently, when she was 14 years old, she's now in her mid-30s, I would have been 4 years old at the time, and this would have happened around 1994, she had been dating a man named Andrew, who had been living with my dad at the time after my parents divorced. According to Andrea, this man, her new boyfriend Andrew, Andrew's twin brother Daniel, and my father had taken turns beating her, raping her, and forcing her to prostitute herself in order to make money off her. Eventually, they ended up selling her to child prostitution, from which she said she had never recovered. At this point, I realized that this is where I recognized her from. My dad had been roommates with her boyfriend Andrew, and I used to see all three of them when I went over to visit him every second weekend. She sobbed inconsolably during the whole retelling of this story, telling my mother how after this traumatic experience, she had turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of her abuse, and she had been addicted to crack and alcohol off and on ever since because of what my father had done to her. My mom was shocked. She didn't know what to do. On one hand, she knew my father to be a generous, soft-spoken and kind person who never lifted a finger to her or to any person, and who rarely raised his voice. But on the other hand, it seemed odd that Andrea would just happen to remember his name all these years later if she had been lying. She didn't know who to believe. After several hours of crying and much consoling on my mother's part, Andrea finally left. And that's when the stalking began. A few days after this encounter, my mom came home from work to find Andrea's boyfriend sitting on the couch, waiting for her. He immediately told her that he was planning on killing my dad, and that my dad deserved to die because he was a pedophile, rapist piece of shit. And that if my mom told anybody at all, especially the cops, he would be sure to kill me as well. He then concluded his threat by describing the layout of our living room and exactly what outfit I was wearing that day. From then on, he and/or Andrea would text or call her several times a day to threaten and taunt her, telling her that they were going to call the cops on my dad and have him thrown in prison. They were going to have him killed, and if she told anybody, they would hire someone to rape and murder me. Naturally, my mother was absolutely terrified. She was from an upper middle class family who immigrated to Canada from Germany. She had never dealt with this type of person before. She stopped eating, she couldn't sleep, and she even stopped going to work. She lost 30 pounds and her hair started to fall out from stress. She started having panic attacks because she didn't know what to do. Later she told me she understood how I felt now because I have an anxiety disorder that causes me to have panic attacks. Eventually, after the night I almost got stabbed, she decided that she had to call the cops. She couldn't take the chance that they would hurt me. She had to do something about it. And what she found out was shocking. Andrea was well known to the police. When my mom told them this story, she was so well known that they weren't even surprised to hear her story. In fact, they told her Andrea had done this exact same thing to at least a dozen other men. She would meet and blackmail men into giving her money, electronics, drugs, etc., threatening to call the cops and report them for rape if they didn't. Her boyfriend, who was a dealer of other drugs than just weed, turned out would often use his drug connections to intimidate and extort the men, and for some reason, he never questioned her stories of being raped, abused, and enslaved by all these different men, because there was no doubt in my mind that he genuinely believed that she was telling the truth. Then when Andrea, who was a crack and heroin addict and prostitute, would get arrested on a possession or a drug distribution charge, would attempt to make deals with the police by offering them information about men who were rapists and pedophiles in exchange for less prison time. She eventually did this so many times that the police stopped believing her. After Mom called the cops, the whole story came undone, and Andrea and her boyfriend thankfully haven't bothered us since. But it's been over a year since the whole thing happened, and I'm still terrified to leave the curtains open at nighttime in case somebody is watching me. I don't think I'll ever be able to feel fully safe in this house ever again.